A little girl says to a millionaire CEO, "Hey sir, my mum has a picture of you in her wallet." The afternoon breeze carried the scent of cherry blossoms from the city's Central Park. The streets were bustling with tourists admiring the grandeur of New York, while the locals hurried about their usual routines. Among them, Henry Wallace, the ruthless CEO of Wallace Enterprises, walked with calculated steps. He was the kind of man everyone noticed. Tall, elegant, emanating an aura of absolute control. Henry was going to a charity event, more out of obligation than of his own free will. For him, these engagements were just another opportunity to reinforce his impeccable public image. But that afternoon, something diverted him from his planned route. In the park next to the venue, children's laughter resounded through the trees. He never paid attention to children, but one particular laugh, sweet and crystal clear, made him stop for a brief moment. It was then that he saw her, a little girl with curly brown hair and big, curious eyes. She was holding a blue balloon in one hand and a small stuffed rabbit in the other. Without his noticing, her steps slowed to a complete stop. The girl seemed so oblivious to the chaos around her, so free. It was almost mesmerizing. When she looked up at him, smiling in a charmingly unpretentious way, Henry felt something he hadn't experienced for years, an inexplicable restlessness. Before he could react, she ran towards him, stopping a few steps away. "Hello, sir," she said, her voice lively and without any hesitation. Henry looked at her, surprised. "Hi. My mom has a picture of you in her purse." The sentence hit him like a gust of icy wind, sharp and unexpected. He blinked, trying to understand what he had just heard. "What?" he asked, confused. The girl repeated with all the innocence in the world. "My mother has a photo of you in her wallet. Are you her friend?" Before I continue this heartwarming story, I'd like to ask you for something very special. Subscribe to my channel and help me reach my dream
30,000 subscribers.
Now let's continue. Henry opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. He felt his heart squeeze, something deeply uncomfortable, as if an invisible hand were squeezing his chest. Before he could question her, a female voice sounded from a distance. "Sophia, come here now." The girl turned quickly, waving to a woman who was hurrying towards her. Henry couldn't see her face immediately, but there was something in that voice that made him feel a strange chill. When the woman finally reached the girl and took her hand, she looked up at him, and it was as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. For a split second, everything around them fell silent. Henry stared at the woman as if he were seeing a ghost. Her face was thinner. There were wrinkles of worry on her forehead, but he would never forget those eyes. "Lucy," he finally whispered, his voice almost inaudible. She didn't answer. On the contrary, she squeezed the girl's hand tightly and turned away, as if she wanted to disappear as quickly as possible. Henry stood still, watching them walk away. He should have gone after her, asked her a question, demanded answers, but he couldn't move. The only thing he could hear were the fragments of memories buried years ago, now forcing their way back to the surface. That night was unlike any other for Henry. In the solitude of his penthouse, as the silence echoed through the wide corridors, he stared into a glass of whiskey, without touching it. Lucy's face never left his mind. He remembered the time when they were teenagers, and they used to date in the garden of the mansion. Lucy Bennett, a name he'd thought he'd left in the past, along with all the feelings and regrets that accompanied it. But there she was, alive and real, with a girl who had caught his eye in an almost supernatural way. He wondered why she had never come to him, why she had disappeared from his life and didn't want to get in touch. She never replied to his messages. And most importantly, why did that little girl know his name and mention him as someone close to her? His heart was heavy, and for the first time in years he felt powerless. He decided he needed answers, but he didn't know where to start. Meanwhile, in Lucy's small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. Sophia was already asleep, oblivious to her mother's emotional turmoil. Lucy stared at an old photograph in her hands, a portrait of herself next to Henry, both smiling, young and full of the hopes that time had destroyed. She knew that this chance encounter would not be without consequences. Henry Wallace wasn't the type to ignore the past, especially when it found him so directly. And although she knew she couldn't keep running away, the thought of facing it all again terrified her. But there was something he didn't know, something she had protected with all her might for the last 7 years, and now it was all about to fall apart. The next morning arrived, but the unease remained. Henry had already instructed his team to locate Lucy. He needed to talk to her, to understand what was going on. But deep down there was a growing fear, a feeling that the answers he was looking for could change his life forever. Across town, Lucy also felt the weight of uncertainty. She knew she wouldn't be able to avoid Henry for long, but there was still a choice to be made. Reveal the truth, or continue to keep her secrets buried, even if it consumed her little by little. And so, two lives began to converge again, guided by invisible and inevitable forces. But what awaited them in this reunion was not just the weight of the past, it was a secret that could destroy everything they both knew. The tension in the days that followed was palpable, even though the routines of New York continued as if nothing had changed. Cars rushed through the streets, while people with their own worries rushed past, immersed in lives that would never cross paths. But for Henry Wallace, the world seemed to have stopped. He was sitting in his large living room, his gaze lost in the panoramic view of the city. However, his thoughts were far away. In his hand, he held a sealed envelope delivered by his team that morning. The report on Lucy Bennett was there, and the thought of opening it caused a tightening in his chest. Taking a deep breath, he finally tore open the seal and began to read. Each line seemed to pierce his mind like a sharp blade. Lucy lived in a small, modest apartment in Brooklyn. She worked 2 jobs, waitress by day and assistant at a community library by night. Neither offered more than what was necessary to survive. Her daughter, Sophia Bennett, attended a public school in the area. Henry frowned. He knew that Lucy was proud and independent, but he had never imagined that she would end up like this. As much as he tried to concentrate on the details of the report, one thought kept running through his mind. Sophia, the little girl in the park. She had Lucy's eyes, and something else. Something that seemed strangely familiar. The sound of a message on the phone interrupted his daydreams. It was from his assistant. "Mr. Wallace, we've managed to locate Ms. Bennett's address. We need instructions on how to proceed." He stared at the screen for a long moment, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Finally, he typed a short reply. "Don't do anything just yet. I want to deal with this myself." Meanwhile, in the small Brooklyn apartment, Lucy was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Sophia draw in her notebook. The girl scribbled with concentration, her tongue sticking out slightly as she created a colorful world with colored pencils. "Did you say anything to that man in the park?" Lucy asked suddenly, trying to sound casual. Sophia looked up, confused. "The man in the suit?" "Yes. I told you that you have a photo of him in your wallet. He's your friend, isn't he?" Lucy's heart squeezed. She should have burned that photo years ago, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was a part of her that couldn't let go of the past completely. Now it seemed like a monumental mistake. "He's not exactly my friend, dear. But don't say anything more about him to anyone, okay? This is very important." Sophia frowned, clearly confused, but nodded. "Okay, Mom." Lucy tried to smile, but the gesture seemed forced. When the girl went back to her drawing, she got up and went into the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she reached for a glass of water, but the drink couldn't calm the knot in her stomach. She knew it was only a matter of time before Henry found her. He had always had unlimited resources and an almost ruthless determination. But what terrified her was not the reunion itself, but what it might mean for Sophia. Lucy stared at the door as if expecting someone to knock at any moment. She had to be ready. The following evening, Henry finally made up his mind. After hours of not knowing what to do, he decided to go to Lucy's apartment. He wanted answers, and more than that, he needed to understand what had happened to her since he had traveled. The building where Lucy lived was a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings Henry was used to. The walls were peeling, and the elevator made unsettling noises as it slowly ascended. When he reached her floor, he felt a strange tension in the air. He stopped in front of the door with the number 306. For a moment, all he could do was stare at the number, trying to find the courage to knock. Finally, he raised his hand and gave 3 firm knocks. Inside, Lucy froze at the sound. She knew who it was before she even opened the door. Her heart raced, and her hands began to sweat. When she finally turned the handle, she saw Henry standing there, as impeccable and intimidating as she remembered. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence was heavy, laden with unsaid things and years of distance. "Lucy," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. She squeezed the door, as if that could keep him away. "Henry, you shouldn't be here." "I had to come," he replied, taking a step towards her. "I need to understand what happened." Lucy shook her head, as if that could undo reality. "There's nothing to understand. You left. I've moved on." His eyes narrowed. "Moved on? With a daughter who—" "Lucy, don't try to lie to me." She felt the blood drain from her face but kept her gaze steady. "That's none of your business." "None of my business," he repeated, his voice rising. "If that child is my daughter, then it's absolutely my business." "I don't want to do this here," she replied, looking out into the corridor. "Come in." He entered the small apartment, observing every detail. It was simple but welcoming, with touches that clearly reflected Lucy. Photos of Sophia were scattered across the shelves, but there were none that revealed more than Lucy was willing to share. "She's mine, isn't she?" Henry finally asked, breaking the silence. Lucy sighed, taking a seat on the sofa. "It's not that simple, Henry." He sat facing her, his eyes burning with determination. "Then explain it to me." She was silent for a long moment, her gaze lost somewhere on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "You broke my heart, Henry. And then you disappeared. I couldn't look for you, your parents threatened me, I couldn't talk to you anymore. Not after everything that happened." He frowned. "What happened, Lucy? Why didn't you ever tell me anything? My parents told me you'd left too and got married." She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could say anything, the sound of small footsteps echoed down the corridor. Sophia appeared in the living room, holding the stuffed rabbit. "Mom, that's your friend from the picture in your wallet, isn't it?" Henry looked at the little girl, his heart squeezing at seeing her so close. She was a copy of Lucy, but there was something of him in her, a reflection he couldn't ignore. Lucy swallowed, looking from Sophia to Henry. The silence between the three of them was deafening, charged with a tension that no words could relieve. Henry's gaze settled on Lucy, his voice low and charged with emotion. "I deserve to know the truth, Lucy. You can't hide it from me any longer." Lucy closed her eyes as if to block out reality. When she finally opened them, her expression was a mixture of fear and determination. "It's not just about you, Henry. There's something you don't know, something that could change everything." The silence in Lucy's small apartment was dense, almost tangible. Henry was motionless, his eyes fixed on her, as if he were trying to read what the words didn't say. Lucy felt the weight of his gaze and knew she couldn't run away for much longer. But how to begin? How to explain something that she herself could barely process? Sophia, still standing in the hallway doorway, looked suspicious and curious. She held the stuffed rabbit against her chest, an instinctive gesture that revealed her attempt to understand the tension in the room. Lucy knew she needed to get her away from the conversation before anything was said. "Sophia," said Lucy, her voice gentler than she felt, "why don't you go and play in your room for a while? Mommy needs to talk with Mr. Henry." Sophia looked at Henry again, her eyes large and full of questions she still couldn't formulate. But obediently she turned around and walked slowly into the bedroom, casting one last glance at them before closing the door. When she disappeared, Lucy felt the air become even heavier. Henry didn't wait long to speak. "Lucy," he began, his voice firm but with an undertone of something else and perhaps hurt or despair. "I need to know, is she my daughter?" Lucy got up from the sofa and began to walk across the room, her footsteps resounding on the worn wooden floor. "It's not that simple, Henry," she said, avoiding his eyes. "Don't tell me that again," he retorted, frustration evident in his voice. "None of this is simple. But hiding a daughter of mine for 7 years, that's beyond what I can accept." She stopped, took a deep breath and finally faced him. "Do you think I wanted that? That I chose to keep you out of her life? You weren't there, Henry. You don't know what I went through." "Then tell me," he insisted, his voice lower but still charged with emotion. "Tell me everything, Lucy, because honestly I don't know if I'll be able to cope if you keep leaving me in the dark." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather her courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "Yes, Sophia is your daughter." Henry felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under his feet. Even though he was almost certain of it, hearing the words was like a physical blow. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his tone oscillating between incredulity and pain. Lucy laughed bitterly, a mirthless laugh that sounded more like an attempt to relieve tension than anything else. "How could I? After what happened between us, after how you left without any explanation, I was thrown out of your house, pregnant, not knowing what to do." "I didn't leave without an explanation," he retorted, his voice rising again. "You know I had to. I had problems to deal with, things that weren't in my control. I know, I remember. Still, I had no choice. I had to deal with everything on my own," she said, the pain in her voice now undeniable. "I was pregnant, scared, and had no idea how to move on." Henry remained silent, her words hitting him like a punch. He knew there were things in his past that could have made him less worthy of forgiveness, but he never imagined the impact would be so devastating. "Lucy," he began, but she interrupted him. "And after a while, I didn't come to you because I thought it would be better that way," she continued, her voice heavy with emotion. "I was trying to protect Sophia. And frankly, I was trying to protect myself too. I didn't want her to be just another liability in your perfect life, Henry." He took a step forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her take a step back. "Do you think I would have seen Sophia as a liability? How can you think so little of me?" Henry was standing in front of Lucy, his eyes fixed on her, full of emotion, while she looked down at the floor, trying not to let his presence completely dismantle her. He had just heard what he had always feared. Sophia was his daughter. But now the question was deeper. How had they gotten to that point? Why had Lucy pushed him away, keeping him in the dark? "I never meant it to be like this, Henry," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. She knew that this conversation was inevitable, but nothing could prepare her for the moment when she had to confront the past that united them and what had torn them apart. "You don't understand what it was like, Henry," she began, her voice trembling. "I was just the maid's daughter, someone who should never have been noticed, least of all by you." Henry frowned, confused. "What does that have to do with the fact that you hid Sophia from me?" She finally faced him, tears threatening to fall. "You know what your parents did when they found out about us. They sent you across the ocean, Henry, away from me, away from everything you said you wanted." The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Henry was silent for a moment, remembering the events he had buried for years. Yes, he remembered the summer his parents had caught them together, laughing and carefree in the garden of the family mansion. He was only 18, and Lucy, with her hair up in a ponytail and a smile that lit up the world, seemed to be everything he needed. But that night his father walked into his room, his face as hard as a rock. "You're going to England, Henry, tomorrow. We'll make sure you concentrate on what matters, your education and the future of our family." He had tried to argue, but to no avail. His parents had made it clear that Lucy wasn't right for him. The anger he had felt then resurfaced now, mixed with guilt and overwhelming regret. "Lucy, I never wanted to leave. I never wanted to leave you," he said, his voice breaking. "But you did," she replied, her pain showing in every word. "And you never came back, Henry. You disappeared, as if I'd never meant anything." He ran his hands through his hair, trying to process everything. "I wanted to come back. I sent lots of messages for my parents, but after a while I thought that maybe you had moved on, that maybe it was better for you." "Better for me?" She let out a bitter laugh. "I was alone, Henry. Pregnant at 19 with no one to support me. I had to abandon everything, every dream I had to raise our daughter. Do you know what that's like? My mother, on a maid's salary, helped me raise Sophia. Her parents pretended not to know anything. The guilt weighed on him like an anchor. I didn't know," he admitted, his voice almost cracking. "If I had known, I would have done something. I would have come back. But you didn't," she retorted, angrily wiping away her tears. "And I couldn't risk you showing up just to mess up our lives. Sophia is my priority, Henry, always has been, and I couldn't let you treat her like your parents treated me, like someone who wasn't enough." Henry was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. The truth was more painful than he had imagined, and the guilt he felt seemed unbearable. Before he could reply, a sound interrupted the moment. From Sophia's room, something fell with a thud. They both looked instinctively at the door, and Lucy quickly wiped away her tears before walking over. She opened the door to find Sophia sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered toys. The little girl looked at her mother with a slightly guilty expression. "I'm sorry, Mommy, I dropped the pencil case." Lucy tried to smile, but the effort seemed exhausting. "It's all right, darling. Pack up while I finish talking, okay?" Sophia nodded, but her eyes were full of questions again. Lucy closed the door and went back into the living room, where Henry was still standing, looking as lost as she was. "It can't go on like this," he finally said, his voice calmer but still full of determination. "I want to be part of her life, Lucy. I have to." She shook her head, as if trying to understand something incomprehensible. "And how do you think that's going to work, Henry? Do you think you can just show up after all these years and fix everything with pretty words?" "I don't know," he admitted, his tone honest and vulnerable. "But I know I can't just walk away again." "And what happens when your family finds out? What happens when they try to push you away again like they did before?" "I'm no longer that boy they can manipulate," he replied, his voice firm. "I'm the man who built his own life, Lucy, and I'm going to fight for Sophia and win her love. That wasn't fair to either of us." She looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing his sincerity. But before she could reply, the sound of something unexpected echoed through the room, the sound of Henry's phone vibrating in his pocket. He picked it up, frowning, as he saw the number on the screen. When he answered, his assistant's urgent voice filled the silence. "Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have a problem. Something urgent has come up involving your company." Henry closed his eyes in frustration. He knew he would have to deal with it, but he hated to leave the conversation unfinished. "I'll have to go," he said, putting the phone back in his pocket. "But it's not over, Lucy. I'll be back, and we'll sort it out." She didn't reply, just watched him leave. When the door closed, Lucy felt the weight of everything that had happened. She knew Henry was determined, but the shadow of the past, and its secrets, still hung over them. And she knew that once everything came to light, there would be no turning back. On the way to the office, Henry Wallace couldn't get Lucy and Sophia out of his mind. The images of the small living room, Lucy's determined gaze and Sophia's innocent expression danced through his mind like a movie he couldn't pause. The driver tried to strike up a conversation about Manhattan's infernal traffic, but Henry remained silent, staring out of the window without really seeing anything. He felt a mixture of guilt, anger, and confusion, as if his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. When he arrived at the Wallace Enterprises building, the frenetic movement of the lobby was enough to remind him that his life would not stop for him to solve his personal problems. The urgent problem that had brought him back required immediate attention. However, while reviewing contracts and discussing strategies with his managers, his mind constantly wandered to the past. He wondered how far his parents' manipulations had gone. Did they know about Lucy's pregnancy? Had they kept it from him? And what would he do now with Sophia and with Charlotte? The name hit him like a bucket of cold water. Charlotte had been his girlfriend for almost 2 years, smart, ambitious, and completely integrated into Henry's luxurious and demanding lifestyle. But how would she react to learning that he had a daughter? He could almost hear the coldness in her voice as she processed the information. The day at the office was exhausting, but productive enough for the immediate crisis to be contained. Still, Henry couldn't ignore the need to confront the past. He knew he couldn't go on with this anguish without answers. That evening, Henry drove alone to the Wallace mansion, located on the outskirts of New York. The house was a monument to his family's wealth, with imposing columns and meticulously tended gardens. But for Henry, the place always had the coldness of a gilded prison. He entered unannounced, passing the butler, who greeted him with the usual formality. In the living room, he found his parents, George and Eleanor Wallace, sitting in leather armchairs like two monarchs on informal thrones. "Henry!" his mother exclaimed, rising to greet him. "What a pleasant surprise. We didn't know you were coming." His father, always more reserved, just nodded, but didn't lift his eyes from the newspaper he was reading. "I need to talk to you," Henry said, ignoring his mother's warm gestures. George looked up for the first time, frowning. "That sounds serious." "It is serious," Henry replied, his voice charged with intensity. Eleanor exchanged a worried glance with her husband before sitting down again. "What happened, darling?" Henry took a deep breath, the words heavy in his throat. "I saw Lucy Bennett." The silence in the room was immediate and deafening. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but she tried to hide her reaction, while George put the newspaper aside, his cold eyes assessing his son. "Lucy Bennett," repeated Eleanor, forcing a tone of neutrality. "Yes, Lucy," Henry continued, taking a step forward. "The girl you drove out of my life. The one you sent me to England for without even letting me say goodbye." George leaned forward, his hands clasped together in a thoughtful gesture. "We sent you to England because it was best for your future, Henry. It was nothing against Lucy. You had a greater responsibility to your family." "Greater responsibility," Henry retorted, his anger finally exploding. "And while you were looking after my future, did you know she was pregnant?" Eleanor went pale and George looked away for a brief moment, which was enough for Henry to realize the truth. "You knew," he muttered, almost in disbelief. "Henry," Eleanor began, but her voice was shaky. "We were thinking about what was best for everyone. You were so young, and Lucy, she had nothing to offer you." "She had nothing to offer?" Henry repeated, incredulous. "She was the only thing I wanted. And you decided for me, as if my feelings meant nothing." "You wouldn't have understood back then," George interjected, his voice firm. "You were blinded by a teenage crush. If we had allowed it to continue, it would have destroyed your life. And while you were protecting my life, you let Lucy face it all alone," Henry said, his tone bitter. "You took everything away from her, and now I find I have a 7-year-old daughter I've never met." Eleanor covered her mouth with her hand, clearly shaken, while George maintained his rigid posture but avoided Henry's gaze. "I came here to find out the truth," Henry continued. "If there's anything else you've been hiding, tell me now, because I'm not going to let you control my life again." Eleanor tried to reach him, but Henry backed away. He felt that nothing they could say at that moment would change what had already been done. "I expected nothing less from you," he finally said, his voice cold, "and now I have to deal with the consequences of your choices." Without waiting for an answer, he turned and left the mansion, leaving the two of them sitting in an uncomfortable silence. Back in his apartment, Henry knew he had another difficult conversation ahead of him. Charlotte would be arriving at any moment, and he needed to tell her the truth. He waited for her on the sofa, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway before she entered. "Henry," said Charlotte as she entered, smiling as she took off her coat. "You're quiet today. What's up?" "We need to talk," he said bluntly. She stopped, the smile disappearing. "That doesn't sound good." Henry gestured for her to sit down. "When she did," he began, trying to choose his words carefully, "I've discovered something about my past. Something that's going to change a lot of things in my life." Charlotte frowned. "What have you discovered?" I have a daughter, Charlotte," he said at last. The silence that followed was suffocating. Charlotte blinked, as if she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "A daughter?" "Yes, I didn't know until now," he explained quickly. "Lucy Bennett, you know, the daughter of my family's maid. She and we had a relationship years ago. And now I found out that she was pregnant when my parents sent me to England." Charlotte stared at him, her eyes shining with something between shock and anger. "And you expect me to just accept that? That you have a daughter with another woman?" "I'm not asking you to accept anything, Charlotte," he said, trying to remain calm. "But that's the reality. I need to be part of her life." She was silent for a moment before standing up. "I need to think, Henry. This is too much for me right now." And without waiting for an answer, she left, leaving Henry alone in the apartment with only the sound of his own thoughts echoing through the room. He knew that the next few days would be the hardest of his life. But one thing was certain. He wouldn't give up on Sophia no matter what he had to face. Henry Wallace didn't sleep that night. The conversation with his parents had opened wounds that he didn't even know still existed. The memories of how they had driven him away from Lucy were as clear as ever. And now, with the truth exposed, the guilt of having lost years by his daughter's side weighed on him like an anchor. He needed to win Sophia back. But it wasn't that simple. Lucy had erected barriers around the girl, and he knew he would have to be patient. Even so, his determination was greater than any obstacle. He wouldn't give up on them. The next morning, Henry drove to Brooklyn. He knew that Lucy was still processing the previous visit, but he needed to tell her what he had discovered. The truth was too heavy a burden to carry alone. Lucy was in the kitchen when she heard knocks on the door. She looked out of the window, immediately recognizing Henry's car parked on the street. She took a deep breath before opening the door, knowing that this conversation would be just as difficult as the last. "Henry," she said, surprised, but not completely. "We need to talk," he said bluntly. "There's more you need to know." She hesitated for a moment before making way for him to enter. The room was as before, small but cozy. Sophia was in the bedroom, playing, and the muffled sound of her singing voice was almost comforting. Henry sat down on the sofa, but didn't relax. He was clearly restless, and Lucy noticed this immediately. "What happened?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I confronted my parents last night," he began, looking at her intensely. They knew about our relationship, our love, and then they found out you were pregnant when they sent me to England. They kept it from me." Lucy looked away, trying to process. Part of her already imagined that Henry's parents might have acted like this, but to hear it confirmed was something else. "They said they were thinking of what's best for me," Henry continued, his voice laced with frustration. "But all they did was destroy what we had. They left you alone, Lucy, and now I see how selfish they were." Lucy shook her head, trying to hold back the tears. "They made me promise never to try to find you," she finally said, "and at the time I was so scared and lost that I thought it was the best thing to do." "Lucy," Henry said, leaning forward, "I know I let you down by not coming back, but now I'm here. I want to be in Sophia's life. I want to be the father she deserves. Please give me a chance." Lucy sighed deeply. "You don't understand how complicated this is, Henry. She doesn't know who you really are. You suddenly appearing like this could confuse her. I need to do this carefully for her sake. I'm not asking you to let me sort this out on my own," he replied, his voice firm. "I just want a chance to be there for her." Lucy looked at the floor, struggling with her own emotions. Finally, she said, "I'll talk to her. I'll explain things little by little, but I'll do it my way. Give me a few days to prepare her." Henry nodded, even if he wasn't entirely satisfied. "All right, but I'm not going to disappear again, Lucy. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait." As Henry left the apartment, his heart was heavy but also hopeful. He knew he had to trust Lucy and give her the space she needed, even if it frustrated him. However, another question still hung over him: Charlotte. That evening, Charlotte showed up at his apartment with a serious expression. Henry knew the conversation wouldn't be easy, but he had to be honest with her. "I've been thinking," she began, before he could speak. "And, Henry, I just can't deal with it." "With what?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. "With all of it," she replied, gesturing vaguely. "You have a daughter with the daughter of your family's maid. That changes everything, Henry. I don't see myself as a stepmother, and I definitely don't want that complication in my life." He took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Charlotte, I didn't choose this situation, but now that I know, I can't ignore it. Sophia is my daughter, and I'm not going to abandon her." "I understand that," she said, her voice lower. "But I don't think I'm the right person for you right now. I need some time to think, and I'm going to England to do that course I mentioned. Maybe that will give us some clarity." Henry didn't try to stop her. He knew deep down that Charlotte had already made up her mind. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said, his voice calm but distant. She stood up and kissed his cheek before leaving. As the door closed, Henry felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. He knew that the focus now had to be on Sophia and Lucy, and Charlotte was clearly not part of this new path. Meanwhile, at the Wallace mansion, George and Eleanor felt tormented by guilt. The conversation with Henry had shaken them both, and for the first time they were facing the consequences of their actions. "Do you think we did the right thing back then?" asked Eleanor, sitting on the huge sofa in the living room. George, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, sighed. "We did what we thought was best, but now, looking back, maybe we made a terrible mistake." "Maybe," Eleanor retorted, her voice heavy with emotion. "We took away Henry's chance of happiness and let Lucy face everything alone. And now we have a granddaughter we never helped, never knew." George was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "We need to fix this somehow." "I don't know if there is any way to fix it, George," Eleanor replied, tears flowing. "But maybe we can help from now on, if Henry and Lucy let us." The next morning, Henry received an unexpected message from his mother. "Henry, we know we've made mistakes and we're sorry for that. We want to be a part of Sophia's life if you and Lucy give us the chance. Please tell us how we can help." For now, he needed to focus on the next step, gaining Lucy and Sophia's trust, even if it took time. Henry stared at his mother's email, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. He knew that his parents' attempt at reconciliation was sincere, but he also understood that he couldn't simply open the door to them without considering what Lucy thought. He took a deep breath before replying with a short, to-the-point message. "Thanks for the message, but it's not just up to me. Lucy and Sophia are the ones most affected, and I will respect their time. There's no guarantee that there will be room for you now." He clicked send and felt the weight of tension on his shoulders. The mistakes of the past would not be corrected so easily, and he knew he would need to protect Lucy and Sophia from any unresolved expectations. Across town, Lucy was standing in the kitchen, staring at the cup of coffee in her hands, as if she had answers that weren't coming. Sophia was in the living room, drawing on the carpet, oblivious to the emotional storm her mother was facing. Lucy knew Henry would come back. He had promised not to disappear, and despite her fear, she didn't doubt his determination. But what worried her most was what Henry had shared on their last visit, that his parents knew about the pregnancy. She clearly remembered the day Eleanor Wallace had called her into the mansion's study. The woman was as elegant as ever, but there was a cutting coldness in her tone. "You must understand, Lucy," Eleanor had said, "that Henry has greater responsibilities than you. We'll look after him and you'll get on with it. Don't try to complicate things." Lucy had swallowed her pride, hiding the growing panic in her chest, and had silently agreed. Now, everything seemed to resurface with an intensity that left her paralyzed. When Henry knocked on the door that afternoon, Lucy sighed. She knew he wouldn't give up, but that didn't mean she was ready to deal with everything. "Come in," she said, opening the door. Henry entered, his countenance serious but without his usual impatience. He was learning to be careful when approaching Lucy, especially now that he knew how fragile her trust was. "Sophia's in her room," said Lucy, anticipating his question. "You're not going to see her today. I'm not ready for that yet." Henry nodded, understanding, even if he felt the weight of frustration. "I've come because we need to talk," he said, taking a seat on the sofa. Lucy sat in the opposite armchair, crossing her arms. "About what?" "About my parents," he began. "They want to try to make amends, but I've made it clear that it's not my decision. I said that you need time, and that I'm not promising anything." Lucy snorted, a dry laugh escaping her lips. "They want to make amends now after everything they've done? Henry, I don't trust them. I don't want them anywhere near Sophia." "I know," he said, his voice calm. "And I'm not trying to pressure you into changing your mind. I just thought you should know." Lucy leaned forward, her eyes fixed on him. "Henry, I've fought hard to protect Sophia from all this. I'm not going to let her parents get close to her and mess up her life like they did ours." "I understand," replied Henry genuinely, "and I'm not going to force anything. But if you ever change your mind, let me know. I just want to do what's right for both of you." Lucy relaxed a little, surprised by his attitude. The Henry she had known years ago wasn't so patient or conciliatory. He was changed, and that made her wonder how far she could trust him again. Meanwhile, at the Wallace mansion, Eleanor was sitting in the living room holding an old photograph of Henry, taken when he was just 18. She remembered that time with a mixture of pride and regret. Pride for everything her son had achieved, but regret for the choices that had taken him away from Lucy and, now, Sophia. George entered the room and saw his wife lost in thought. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" She nodded, without taking her eyes off the photo. "We were so selfish, George. We never thought about what Lucy or Henry really wanted. We were only concerned with what seemed right to us." "We can't change the past," he replied, sitting down next to her, "but we can try to do better from now on if they'll let us." Eleanor sighed, feeling the weight of uncertainty. "I just hope it's not too late." Over the next few days, Lucy began to prepare Sophia for the conversation she knew she would need to have. She sat with the girl during the evenings, telling her stories from when she was younger, trying to introduce the idea that families weren't always like those in cartoons. Sophia was curious, but seemed satisfied with the vague answers her mother gave her for the time being. Lucy knew she was just putting off the inevitable, but she wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, it would be the right time. Henry, for his part, respected Lucy's space but remained present. He sent text messages regularly, always short and respectful, just to let her know that he was available to help with anything. One day, Lucy received a message from him that made her pause for a moment. "I know you don't trust my parents, and rightly so, but I want you to know that for me, Sophia will always come first. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her, even if it means keeping them apart." Lucy didn't reply immediately, but his words stuck in her mind. Perhaps Henry really had changed, but trusting him again would be a long and uncertain process. As the sun set over New York that evening, Lucy felt a small glimmer of hope for the first time. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what the past had destroyed, but there was still a long way to go. Lucy sat on Sophia's bed that night, holding her daughter's favorite stuffed bunny while watching the little girl's angelic face. Sophia, with her curly brown hair spilling over the pillow, was concentrating on a picture book, her eyes shining in the soft light of the lamp. Lucy took a deep breath. She knew this was the moment. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, and she was finally ready to tell the truth. Sophia needed to know. "Sophia, darling," Lucy began, her voice calm but charged with emotion. The little girl looked at her, curious. "Yes, Mommy. I need to talk to you about something very important," said Lucy, tousling a lock of her daughter's hair. Sophia sat down on the bed, hugging the rabbit to her chest. "What is it, Mommy? Did I do something wrong?" "No, my love, of course not," Lucy replied quickly, stroking her cheek. "In fact, it's something I should have told you before. Something very special." Sophia frowned, puzzled. "What is it?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. "You've asked me several times about your father, haven't you?" Sophia's eyes widened and she nodded. "Yes, but you always said he couldn't be here." "That was true in a way," said Lucy, her voice breaking. "But he's here now, Sophia. He's back, and he really wants to meet you." Sophia's reaction was unexpected and instantaneous. Her face lit up with such pure, innocent joy that Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "My father?" Sophia asked, almost in disbelief. Is he here? Is he going to see me? Really?" Lucy laughed softly, trying to stay calm. "Yes, my love. He's here, and he really wants to be a part of your life. He wants to be your father." Sophia was silent for a moment, processing the news. Then, with a sudden leap, she hugged Lucy with all the strength her little arms could muster. "I have a father, Mommy. I have a daddy." Lucy held her daughter, feeling her heart squeeze and ease at the same time. It was as if years of pain and uncertainty were being washed away by that moment of happiness. At school, at the Father's Day party. "Now I'll have someone there, Mommy," Sophia said, her words rushing out in excitement. "My friends always say they have dads who play ball with them or who come to the performances. Now I will too." Lucy pulled her daughter onto her lap, squeezing her as silent tears streamed down her face. "Yes, my darling, he'll be there for you." Sophia pulled away a little, looking at her mother with a curious expression. "Mom, is he nice? Can he play? Is he going to teach me how to ride a bike?" Lucy smiled, wiping away her own tears. "He's very nice, Sophia, and I'm sure he'd love to teach you how to ride a bike." "I've always wanted to learn," said Sophia, clapping her hands. "And now I can have a dad who will help me. He'll be there at the school's end-of-year party, won't he? To see me dance." "Yes," promised Lucy, her voice soft but full of certainty. "He'll be there to see you." Sophia was quiet for a moment, biting her lower lip. "Mum, did you know that at school children sometimes laughed at me because I didn't have a father?" Lucy felt her heart squeeze again. "They did?" Sophia nodded, looking down at the floor. "Yes. They said I was different, that everyone had a father but me. But now I can tell them that my father will be there, that he loves me and wants to be with me." Lucy held her daughter's face with her hands, forcing her to look up. "Sophia, you've always been special, even without a father around. You're the most amazing girl in the world, and I'm so proud of you." Sophia smiled, but her eyes were watery. "I know, Mum, but now I have a father, and I'm going to show everyone at school that he's going to be with me." Lucy kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The next day, Henry arrived at the apartment with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Lucy had called the night before to say that Sophia was ready to meet him. He had spent the whole morning rehearsing what to say, although he knew that nothing could fully prepare him for that moment. When Lucy opened the door, Henry realized that he was more nervous than he had imagined. Sophia was standing next to her mother, looking at him curiously. "Hi, Sophia," said Henry, his voice soft. "Hi," she replied, holding the stuffed bunny tightly. Lucy gave Sophia a gentle push, encouraging her. The little girl walked slowly over to Henry, studying him carefully. He knelt down to her height, giving her a gentle smile. "I'm your father," he said, his voice breaking. Sophia was silent for a moment, but then she smiled. "Are you going to teach me to ride a bike?" Henry laughed, feeling a knot form in his chest. "Of course I will, and I'm going to do a lot more than that. I'll be here for whatever you need." She jumped into his arms, hugging him tightly. Henry felt the tears flow as he held his daughter for the first time. "I promise I'll never leave again, Sophia. Never." Lucy watched the scene with tears in her eyes, feeling an indescribable sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she believed that everything would be all right. Sophia took a step back, looking at Henry with a twinkle in her eye. "Are you coming to my school? To the Father's Day party? I'm going to show everyone that I have a dad now." "Yes, I will," promised Henry. "I'll be there. Always." And at that moment, he knew he would do anything to keep that promise. The following months brought a complete transformation in the lives of Lucy, Sophia, and Henry. What had once seemed like a whirlwind of uncertainty and intense emotions now began to settle into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Henry became a devoted and present father, showering Sophia with love and attention. He taught her to ride a bike as he had promised, holding on tightly to the seat as she pedaled for the first time, screaming with joy when she managed to balance on her own. Every little victory for Sophia was a triumph for him, proof that he was making up for lost time. At school, Sophia couldn't stop talking about her father. At the end-of-year performances, Henry was there in the front row, applauding so loudly that Sophia laughed from the stage. And at the Father's Day party, she walked hand in hand with him, beaming as she showed her friends that she now had a father to share that special moment with. Lucy watched all this with a constant, albeit discreet, smile. Seeing Sophia so happy was the greatest reward for her. At first, she had hesitated to make room for Henry in their lives, but his unwavering dedication had won her over. More than that, Henry was always by her side, offering support in moments she had previously faced alone. When Sophia got sick, he would show up with medicine and blankets. When she needed help with her schoolwork, he sat patiently by to help her understand. Over time, Lucy realized that she was beginning to depend on Henry in ways she hadn't imagined. There was something comforting about having him around, about sharing the burden of responsibility. Meanwhile, Henry's parents, George and Eleanor, were slowly trying to get closer. They knew they had made serious mistakes in the past, but they were determined not to repeat the same patterns. One day, Lucy received a call from Eleanor. The woman's voice was shaky but sincere. "Lucy, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," she began, "but I'd like to meet my granddaughter. I don't want to be a stranger to her." Lucy hesitated for a moment. She still had reservations about the Wallaces, but decided that perhaps it was time to take a small step. "We can arrange a meeting, but on my terms," she said firmly. Eleanor agreed without hesitation, and the meeting took place in a nearby park. Sophia, always curious and sociable, quickly got chatting to her grandparents, who brought her simple, heartfelt gifts, a puzzle she loved and a doll she carried everywhere. Although Lucy still maintained a certain distance, she realized that George and Eleanor were genuinely trying to be better. It didn't erase the past, but it was a start. One day, while Sophia was at school, Henry showed up at Lucy's apartment with 2 cups of coffee. They sat together in the kitchen, talking about Sophia's activities and her progress at school. Lucy watched Henry as he talked, noticing the softness in his gaze and the way he seemed genuinely engaged in every detail of Sophia's life. She caught herself smiling, and when Henry looked at her, something passed between them, something that had been dormant for years. "You've been amazing, Henry," said Lucy, breaking the silence. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time," he replied, his voice low. "You haven't lost everything," she retorted, her gaze fixed on his. "Sophia is happy that you're here now, and so am I." Henry leaned in slightly as if he couldn't help it. "I couldn't do it without you, Lucy." For a moment, everything around them disappeared. They were closer than ever, and Henry lightly touched her hand. Lucy didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a smile that said more than words could express. Their relationship blossomed naturally. There was no rush, just a growing connection fueled by the love they shared for Sophia and the respect they had rebuilt. When Sophia realized that her parents were approaching, her excitement was contagious. "Are you getting married?" she asked one evening, as the three of them ate dinner together. Lucy and Henry laughed, exchanging complicit glances. "We're still figuring that out, darling," said Lucy, but the warm tone in her voice made it clear that the idea wasn't as absurd as it would have been months ago. Meanwhile, Charlotte sent sporadic news from England. She had decided not to return, and her messages indicated that she was happy with her new life. Henry wished her all the best, but knew that the chapter with Charlotte was closed. He now had a new life with Lucy and Sophia, and that was all that mattered. On Sophia's birthday, Henry organized a party in the park, inviting friends from school, family, and even George and Eleanor. Sophia ran around, laughing and joking, while Lucy and Henry watched with pride. At the end of the party, when everyone was leaving, Sophia ran up to the two of them and hugged them tightly. "This was the best day ever," she said, her eyes shining with happiness. Lucy and Henry exchanged a look full of emotion. They had faced so many challenges to get there, but at that moment it had all been worth it. As the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Lucy held Henry's hand and they walked together beside Sophia, feeling that, for the first time, they had everything they needed. The past had finally given way to a future full of hope, love, and new possibilities. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, don't forget to like the video and leave your rating in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future stories, and activate the bell to receive notifications. And take the opportunity to watch the next video that's appearing on your screen right now. See you next time.